From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano, John Meoli, and Danielle Allentuck here for a special episode as we are live on a Tuesday in July to discuss the potential impending returns of a couple Orioles starting pitchers. We will dream on what this rotation could look like by season's end. Talk about Kyle Bradish, talk about Grayson Rodriguez. And of course, we will have our minor league check-in to take a look at another intriguing arm on the farm. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, Paul, John, and Danielle all here with you. I bribed them both with some Starbucks coffee, not a sponsor, just to get them here. But I'm glad that we have the three of us under the same roof here.
Yeah, and Starbucks, feel free to sponsor us. We drink a lot of coffee.
Yeah, we basically begged for Marshall's last week or the week before, and it got us approximately nowhere as far as I know. But I'm going to chalk that up to the holiday. They probably just weren't in.
I'm still waiting to see when my Toyota RAV4 is going to appear. They're just going to hand me the keys one day because that's part of the sponsorship, you would think, is John and I each get Toyotas, right?
And special guests like I.
Yes.
Yeah.
You get like a hat, like a Toyota hat maybe, and then we build up to it.
Sure.
I wonder how many of these, like this iteration, like we've done, probably like 20
with the Toyota thing.
No, like with us.
Oh,
me and you, Paul. No offense.
I can look it up. I can look it up pretty quickly. I'd say like 20. We go live every week Tuesday at 9:30. By the way, on YouTube, X, and Facebook. Now we have added Facebook, as John says, for the aunts and uncles back into our thing. But if you are listening, you can always listen on any of your podcast platforms. Write us a 5-star review, and I will read it out here on the show. All right, guys. We're going to talk about the starting pitchers in just a bit, but let's do a quick standings check. The Orioles are 40-49. Did you guys see the Bob Nightingale tweet? Unfortunately, that's always a bad thing. Anytime typically he comes across your podcast,
try not to
timeline, but where he was talking about the Orioles creeping back into the wild card race, and he said they're now 7 games back, as if they haven't been exactly 7 games back, or 6.5, or 7.5, or 8 for the last 2 months. Like, they've been right there the entire time. They're not creeping back into the race. They're playing better baseball, but they are no closer now than they were a month ago.
There's no, being the defender of like Craig Kimbrell Mountain was real tough. And like, and I think I've been in some weird positions on this podcast otherwise, but I don't think being like the keeper of Bob Nightingale Mountain was going to be something I thought, but like, it is unfortunate. I mean, it's objectively not true. And like, spiritually is true, and it's only not true in the context of the fact that the trade deadline is like 3 weeks away. And it's not about how close the Orioles can get on the current run they're on. It's about how close they can get in 3 weeks and whether that matters at all. And that is, so in the context of that, like, they are in the same place that they were. They are a better team. I think it's like 24-15 since TNL Perez left and Trevor Rogers arrived, in not corresponding but spiritually connected moves to me
in the middle of that doubleheader.
Yeah, both of those things happened, and all of a sudden the Orioles are 24-15. If they play at that pace, that's like 85 wins. If they play at that pace until the trade deadline, that's like still 7 games under 500, I believe, and that's not going to cut it. And that's the context it's through. So Bob Nightingale is spiritually correct, and as can be the case, not necessarily objectively so.
Yeah, I mean, the teams that are ahead of you in the standings are going to be playing better baseball. It would be notable if you jumped up, but it would take, like we said maybe a month ago, the second chunk of the season would have to be as good as the first chunk was bad. And it's been better, but it has not been as good as the first chunk was bad. The Orioles just dug themselves too big a hole. And so the Orioles are playing better, but so are the teams ahead of them because they are going to be playoff teams. The Orioles are likely not going to be.
And they're also running out of time to be better.
Yeah.
I mean, the trade deadline's in 3 weeks. And I mean, realistically, you have only until a couple of days before the deadline to pull it together.
Yeah.
So they have an easy schedule coming up: Mets, Marlins, and then the Rockies after the break. But I think it's probably too late.
Yeah.
And complicating things a little bit is there's 20 games, I believe, before the deadline, but there's also a double header on the 29th. So it's just fewer and fewer games. Can I envision them sitting pat until the 31st and saying, all right, who wants some guys?
Yeah.
Yes, I can, but there's a lot of like backloaded games too, because those Blue Jays games are going to be like count double considering the division. So I think it's going to be pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Well, we should give a shout out, by the way, to Ryan O'Hearn for being the lone Orioles All-Star, unless there is a Oriole who was named as a replacement because of injury or another reason at some point over the next week. But Ryan O'Hearn, well-deserved, hitting 287, 11 homers, 839 OPS. Obviously, he has cooled off since his absolutely scorching start. It's a great story for a guy who's been in the big leagues for 8 years and was basically a part-time player in Kansas City and comes to Baltimore, didn't even make the opening day roster when he first got here and turned himself into an all-star. Jackson Holliday came up short. No pitcher really seemed even particularly close. And to me, it's not that the Orioles only have one all-star for the first time since 2022. It's that you can't even make the case somebody was snubbed on this roster. I mean, Jackson Holliday was among the final two with Gleyber Torres, but he's hitting 260 with a 724 OPS. It's not like he's lighting the world on fire. I don't want to diminish the strides that he has made in his sophomore season, but nobody else really seemed like they were all that close to getting an all-star nod.
No, I mean, we asked Tony Mansolino on Saturday in Atlanta, who else would you want to make a case for? And he only had 2 guys to name. He named Jackson Holliday because obviously he was in the fan vote, and then Ramon Laureano. And that was it. There's nobody else you can really even make a case for this year, and they know it themselves. And I think Jackson partly advanced so far because of his name. I mean, let's be real. I mean, he has the Holiday last name. He was the number 1 prospect. He's known across the country. And, I think he could still make it as an injury replacement, but I don't think he deserved it in the first round.
It was also kind of a weak second base group this year. Gleyber Torres has been good, but other than that, and Ramon Laureano, he's kind of had the inverse season of Ryan O'Hearn, where Laureano did not start out the season great, but has just very quietly been the best hitter in the Orioles lineup now for a while and been providing great defense, obviously, in the outfield. So his numbers are right there with O'Hearn's now. It's just he was late getting to those marks, so we just didn't have him top of mind until we look now at June 8th and say, wow, yeah, his numbers are just as good as Ryan O'Hearn's.
Yeah, another slow starting right-handed hitting Orioles free agent.
There have been a few of those this year.
There were a couple. It turned out to matter. It turned out to matter. And when I saw that Tyler O'Neill homered this weekend, I was like, oh boy, we're doing this again. The Gary Sanchez experience was unfortunately cut short, but the Tyler O'Neill renaissance will probably be in the top 12 of the more frustrating things that happened this season if he comes back healthy and just is the guy he's supposed to be.
How many by the end of the year? I think we should come up with a list of the most frustrating things about the 2025 Orioles.
Yeah, join us for our 5-hour-long podcast. It'll be really fun.
The top 412 things.
There will be bathroom breaks. There will be multiple sponsors. So let's say this: if Marshalls does come in, we'll do that podcast.
We'll get them that. Yeah. All right. Danielle, let's talk about the article that you wrote for the BaltimoreBanner.com, where people can subscribe $1 for 6 months about the recovery of Kyle Bradish, because it has been a long road for him to get back, and it is still not over. He is still not out of the woods yet. He is still several weeks away from making a rehab start and then eventually, hopefully, joining the Orioles rotation. But Danielle, you chronicled everything from him first feeling pain back in 2023 all the way up until today. And I think it's interesting where this story starts, because a lot of people obviously think of this as his journey beginning when the start of spring training, Mike Elias announces that Kyle Bradish is out. He's going to get a platelet-rich plasma injection, and that starts the concern. And then eventually he gets Tommy John. But as you note in your article, he was first feeling pain back in 2023 when the Orioles were winning 101 games, and he was making a playoff start.
Yeah, I mean, he told me, that whole year he was able to pitch through it, but the amount of work he had to put in to get on the mound was just unsustainable at this point. He was doing hours of treatment before every start. He couldn't just go out in the outfield and throw to warm up. He had to do all these things to get his elbow ready to get to that point, and he was still in pain, which is just remarkable that he pitched as well as he did without anybody seemingly knowing that he was in that much pain.
Yeah.
So he, really didn't want to get the surgery at first. He spent that entire offseason trying to rehab it non-surgically, ends up getting the PRP. And when he's, in a conversation to get the PRP, they're talking to him about surgery and they're telling him his options. And, his exact response to his team was, if I was able to pitch last year, who's saying that I can't do it this year? So he really wanted to try again. He said he would regret it if he didn't give it another shot before he got the surgery. And obviously we all know what happened. He had to end up getting the surgery, but the recovery from a surgery like this is terrible. It's long, it's painful, it's boring. You're completely isolated. And there are just like daily tasks that you can't do with only one arm, especially your dominant arm. So he wanted to try everything to avoid it and ended up not being able to do so.
Yeah, and obviously gets that PRP injection, comes back, pitches very well. I mean, has a 2.75 ERA, and then finally he gets to a June 14th start against the Phillies, takes himself out, and that's when he ultimately has Tommy John surgery a few days after that, right around the same time that Tyler Wells had his elbow procedure, not Tommy John, but similar. And it wasn't until December that he first picked up a baseball. That is a long time to go without the game that he loves. And Danielle, is somebody yourself who has dealt with arm injuries, dealt with arm surgeries, how difficult that is to be pretty much isolated, recovering on your own, and to not be able to use a function that a lot of us take for granted.
Yeah, and Kyle and I talked a lot about that. I had shoulder surgery shortly after opening day, and I'm still not at the point where I have full range of motion. My arm only goes so high still. And one of the things that Kyle said that I cracked up about, because it happened to me too, is that he kept spilling eggs on the ground because he was trying to crack them with only one arm, and it's something that you don't think about. You can't make yourself breakfast with one arm. And I myself, I cracked so many eggs. I spilled a whole dozen at Sprouts, and they were so nice about it because they were like $10 eggs. And the same thing happened to Kyle at his house. So
I'll go apologize to those hard workers at Sprouts.
I apologize so much. I was so upset about them. But there are just so many things that you hear about a player, getting surgery, and you don't see them until they throw again. But there is so much work that's put in those 6 months. One of the things he was saying that is so simple to us, and I can only do it with my good arm, is that with Tommy John, you can't go like this for a long time, which may not seem super useful, but you need it for a lot of things. And he said this was his big checkpoint, was if he could go like this, he knew he was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And just all these little things that as part of the rehab process, there's a part of your rehab where you're just standing like this, pushing your arm into the wall, simple things that he had to do to even get to the point where he could throw again.
And I'm glad you kind of went into his thought process when he decided to go with a PRP injection before the Tommy John, and then eventually needing the Tommy John, because I think that was a big question a lot of Orioles fans had when he gets the PRP injection is this just going to end in Tommy John no matter what? Is this just going to be a waste of time? And two, is this going to set the timetable back? If he waits now 6 months, 4 months to get the Tommy John, then we're not going to see him for an even longer amount of time. Right now, if everything goes well, we could see him in a rehab start maybe by the end of the month, and then maybe rejoin the Orioles rotation at some point in August or September. But had he undergone the Tommy John surgery way back in January, say, of 2024, perhaps he would be pitching right now. But as you mentioned, Danielle, it's very hard when you're staring down the barrel of a 14-month recovery, and you've already had the benefit of pitching through pain as well and seen that you can do it before.
And I think he knew in January that it would probably end up being Tommy John. But what if it didn't? What if he could have avoided all of this and been back on the mound and played all of last season? There was a chance that could have happened. PRP does work for some people. I had PRP in my right arm, and it's lasted me 10 years at this point. So it is possible. But it's also the whole mental side of it, because by the time he got surgery, he said he was content. He was ready. He knew it was the right decision. But if he had gotten it in January, imagine if he spent, those 6 months thinking, what if I had pitched? What if I didn't have to go through this? It would have killed him mentally. There's a lot of, mental side to being in pain all the time. I went through it. I didn't want to get the surgery right away. A lot of people ask me, why didn't I get the surgery in November when I first hurt my arm? And then I could have been pretty much healed by the time the season started, instead of getting it after opening day. And it's because I was the same.
Yeah.
I would have regretted it and thought, what if I hadn't tried to get the injections and rehab it myself first?
And one thing that I also noted in that article that I either knew and forgot or didn't know at all is that when you get that, I guess this isn't every time, but when you get repair on your UCL, sometimes they take the tendon from another part of your body in order to do that. That's wild.
Yeah, that doesn't sound super fun.
No.
And I think this is something, I'm thinking back as we're talking about when are we getting the surgery, when are we not, to like the Felix Bautista thing. And that was, it didn't really hurt for him to wait and try, but you need to go through a process to get to that point. And ultimately, Kyle Bradish did what I think was best for Kyle Bradish, and as he should. I think with other guys like Tyler Wells, I think it was a little more clear early on. Like John Means blew out, and then it was time to get surgery the first time, and then it obviously was a little more protracted for the revision. I think it's really interesting how I certainly do take this process for granted. I feel like when I was starting writing about baseball, I did like my own version of a Tommy John recovery story. It stunk. It wasn't as good as this one. So good job, Danielle. Bad job, me. More good job, you. But I think that it's just accepted that it's just the worst to go through, and it's accepted that it's pretty accepted that this is something that's going to happen to a lot of guys at some point or another. And the idea that you get hurt, you get the surgery, you go away for a year and a half, and you're back. Like that's a pretty long tunnel for people who are not in the arena to have someone go into, and then they come out the other side, and most of the time they're fine. And I think it was really helpful to see kind of what's inside that tunnel. Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned Felix Bautista too, because he suffered his UCL tear in August of the 2023 season. And then the Orioles were tinkering with the idea of maybe trying to have him pitch through it. Remember, he was pitching in bullpen sessions, and Mike Elias wasn't ruling it out that he could be pitching in October. Ultimately, they shut him down. They give him the surgery. He misses the entire 2024 season, comes back at the start of 2025. And we've seen that it takes a little bit of time, not just after the 12 months, 14 months are up. Once you are back on the mound, you still have to build back up that strength and be able to trust that arm to get that velocity back up. And it started out for Felix Bautista. He was throwing 97-mile-an-hour fastballs. It was not his usual 100. It was a big milestone when he hit 100. So I wonder also if, let's say we do see Kyle Bradish in August and September, and he gets, handful of starts under his belt, if that will help him in 2026, because he won't be coming out in spring training for the first time, pitching against live batters for the first time in forever, and trying to build his velocity back up on February 14th. If he can get a few starts under his belt in the final month of the regular season here, maybe that will help him hit the ground running in 2026.
I think it will. And I want to go back to one thing you said about like learning to trust yourself after a surgery like this, because that's a big part of this as well. It's not only just learning to trust your arm, it's like learning how to throw again. It's learning how to use it. And one thing that Kyle said that I don't think a lot of people who haven't gone through a surgery understand is like the feeling of your arm being stuck. Like that's a real feeling. Like your arm cannot move the same way it can. It used to at first. It's literally stuck. Like my arm literally cannot go above a certain point because it gets stuck. So that's a whole big part of this too, is that like as you're throwing again, you're kind of like teaching your arm how to fully extend and do all the things you have to do to throw. And then you have to trust it to perform at full force and hope that there's not pain associated with it. So it's kind of that huge battle you have to play with. But in terms of coming back this year, I know a lot of people have commented, why don't they save him for next year? And I think if he's ready, let him go. Let him have a regular offseason and build his strengths back up, and let him also mentally get the first couple starts out of the way. So he can come in next year and just be a normal pitcher in spring training.
Yeah, that being able to make 4 starts in September will go a long way towards helping his mental health in the offseason and going into spring training to believe that, yeah, okay, I'm back to my old self. Let's talk about Grayson Rodriguez, somebody who has not undergone Tommy John surgery, but has dealt with a lot over the past, really over the course of his MLB career. Let's start with the timeline. Dealt with shoulder and lat injuries last year. Remember, he had his season cut short in 2024 because of that. The Orioles thought they could get him back for the playoffs. Didn't end up being true, and they get swept out. We see him in spring training. He appears fine, but in early March, he felt sluggish after a second spring training start. Then manager Brandon Hyde said that he was dealing with tricep soreness. 2 days after that, he was diagnosed with elbow inflammation, starts the regular season on the injured list. Then in mid-April, he scratched from a bullpen session with shoulder soreness, diagnosed with a mild lat strain, transferred to the 60-day IL. And then about a month ago, mid-June, he said he's unsure what's causing the lat injuries, but he's hoping to return in 2025. And Danielle, I think a lot of people who are following this saga might look at the differences of injuries and say, well, first it was triceps, then it was elbow. Now we're seeing lat. Is it one injury, or is this a series of different injuries? But I think it's important to remember that all of these things are connected.
Yeah, I actually, I made a comment to my physical therapist the other day because my elbow was bothering me, and I was like, I hate how everything in your arm is connected. And like it's true, like everything is so connected. So like it may have been his lat originally, but it's probably impacting his tricep, probably impacting his rotator cuff. Like it's all involved, it's all interconnected together. So I think while like it may be, you know, a reoccurrence of the old injury, it is probably stemming from the same issue. He is throwing bullpen sessions again. We spoke with him in Atlanta, and he said one of the things that he's changing his arm angle to see if that can kind of fix the lat issue. I think, you know, it's kind of to be seen if that's going to work. I think at some point, tinkering with too many things might lead to more injuries, but at least they're trying to figure something out at this point.
Yeah, he said he threw 25 pitches in that bullpen session, not just fastballs. He threw all his off-speed pitches. He threw all of his offerings. But the arm angle discussion is an interesting one because he's clearly trying to get to the source of what's causing these issues. Because if they're repeating themselves, there might be something that he can do mechanically to change that. And I did notice, according to StatCast, his arm angle went from 42 degrees in 2023 to 38 degrees in 2024. Both those numbers are pretty much right around the major league average in terms of right-handed pitchers. But I do wonder if maybe changing his arm angle, getting it back up to 42 degrees, if he's raising it, if that will help. Who knows at this point? I think he is searching for answers, and the Orioles are searching for answers. The good thing is he is feeling better. It just, we're similar to Kyle Bradish, we're not out of the woods yet. I'm not ready to say that we will see Grayson Rodriguez pitch this season because we have seen him throw bullpen sessions before earlier this year, and it hasn't amounted to a rehab stint yet. And for a guy that was expected to be the de facto ace for the Orioles this year after they don't acquire an ace starting pitcher, it has been a long, arduous journey for Grayson Rodriguez to be able to come back.
Yeah, and Grayson Rodriguez is somebody who has carried a lot of expectations, and I think it's going to be challenging, honestly. And I've thought about this as we're all waiting for him to come back. What are the appropriate expectations for when he does? Because this was kind of a year, you know, looking at Grayson Rodriguez last year, it was like 3.86 ERA and 20 starts. It was 130 strikeouts and 160 and 2/3 innings, like really good starting pitching stuff. And if that is what he is, as long as he's healthy and able to pitch, 20, 25, 30 starts a year, you just take that. You say thank you, and you worry about the other 4 days of the week. But there is this next level that I think it's pretty widely thought that Grayson Rodriguez has. And I was kind of looking at this as a year for him to get that. There was some interesting stuff I think Baseball Prospectus had in the offseason about like pitch sequencing and pitch profiles and how pitches play off each other. And there was a lot better results based on Grayson Rodriguez's stuff and how they play off each other than he actually had in reality. And all these things come together, and you're thinking, this is a pitcher who has a leap there. But now we're not talking about the leap. We're talking about him just getting on the mound. And it feels like we're in this really weird territory, and Paul will know some of these examples better. having been here, and Danielle, I'm sure you know the concepts of them. Like the Orioles have a history of these guys not panning out and then panning out elsewhere. And I'm not saying that we're talking about a Jake Arrieta or a Kevin Gossman, but this is the type of weird pit I'm getting in my stomach that like Grayson Rodriguez is going to reach the end of the line here for some reason, whether it's plateauing stuff or whether he's not able to get on the mound. And for one reason or another, the Orioles move on, and that's turns out to be a mistake. And I want that not to be the case for Grayson Rodriguez. I want that not to be the case for the Orioles. I want that not to be the case for me, because I enjoy watching Grayson Rodriguez pitch a lot. And I just feel like we're in some kind of, we can go in a lot of directions right now.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say the complicated thing about Grayson's surgery is, and we had this conversation about like, why does Kyle Bradish have such a timeline that you can, map out and be like, okay, he can probably come back this week, but Grayson doesn't. He didn't have surgery. And I think the complicated thing is Grayson shows up to the stadium every day. They ask him how he feels, and then they go off of that. So like it's completely based off of how he feels that day. It's really hard for him to make progress because one day he'll feel great and he'll progress, and the next day he won't, and he'll go all the way back to the beginning. So that's why it's kind of been like this iffy timeline for him because, he doesn't have clear objectives to meet every week. It's every day. How do you feel? What can your body handle? And his body has not been able to handle a lot.
Yeah, John, I think you gave a lot of Orioles fans PTSD by mentioning those names and talking about the pitchers that have succeeded elsewhere. There have been a long list of them. The hope is Grayson Rodriguez has a lot of runway here. He's not even arbitration eligible until 2027. He's not going to be a free agent until 2030. They have a lot of time to be able to figure this thing out with him, and he's still only 25 years old. So there is plenty of time. And when he has been on the mound, he has been excellent. But, Kevin Gausman showed flashes of it was like every other season for Kevin Gausman, he was great. And then he would regress. It wasn't so much injuries, it was performance for him. And then he goes to Toronto and is able to figure out his career and extend it by 5-6 years.
Yeah. And he's been awesome. And I just remember, being here for the tail end or the part where Kevin Gausman was actually a starter. I feel like if he was doing what he was doing then, now, no one would care, but he would go out there and strike out like 7 guys and give up like 3 runs in 4 2/3 innings. And he would stand in front of his locker and get asked, like, don't you want to pitch deeper into games? And I'm thinking to myself, like, that was pretty good. Like, yeah, that would be nice. But like, that was pretty good. That's, what are we talking about here? And I feel like if that happened now, it would be a little frustrating, but that wouldn't be a conversation. Kevin Gausman, obviously pitched in a different era of Orioles baseball than the one we're in now. And what are you going to do?
Yeah. Kevin Gausman's 2014 season, by the way, 3.57 ERA, 2016 season, 3.16 ERA. So
and look at the transaction, even for like 2014, I think he was up and down, like,
back and forth.
When the Orioles were doing their, when they were doing it was like 5 years of just being like roster manipulators and option guys and doing all this weird stuff. I think they DFA'd Steve Pierce, but then like didn't actually do anything with it because they like used some roster loophole to not get rid of him. It was very strange. And they wanted me to do, when I was early on in the Sun, a story about like options. And I was talking to Kevin Gausman about it because he got optioned like, 50 times. And the look on his face, and did you know that you have a 4th option because you were optioned, like you used all 3 of your options in your first like 4 or 5, whatever the rule is, like even within the first like 5 years of your professional career, if you use all 3 of your options, you get a 4th. And like the life left his face. He was like, I was done with this. What are you talking about?
Please don't make me go back to Norfolk.
And I don't think he had to again, but the idea that he was going to, I think, change his day at least.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this Orioles rotation going forward, because I think there's a legitimate chance that this Orioles rotation is going to be close to full strength in September. And I feel like I have to knock on wood 8 times when I say that. But you look at this Orioles rotation right now with all of the guys that they are missing. And Zach Eflin, of course, is on the injured list with lower back discomfort. Tyler Wells, of course, is recovering from his own elbow surgery. Cade Povich has left hip inflammation and has been on the injured list for a month. So you're looking at a group right now that if you get them back in September, you could be talking about maybe they're not playing for anything. Maybe they're playing out the string. But you could be talking about Grayson Rodriguez and Zach Eflin and Tyler Wells and Kyle Bradish and maybe Cade Povich all in the same rotation. That's what you were supposed to have in 2025.
I'm not convinced Tyler Wells is coming back as a starter. I mean, they haven't said
Sure.
that, but like I do think he will be a reliever.
Well, and when you talk about this whole group and in general, let's say Tomoyuki Sugano, is still on this team after the trade deadline, whether you try to trade him and you're not able to, or you don't want to trade him, whatever. Same with Zach Eflin. You might not have enough spots in this rotation. Maybe Tyler Wells does have to come back as a reliever, and that might be his best home long term. But you'd like to keep that door open, I would think, for him to be a starter.
I mean, I think it's a really good problem that they probably won't have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something is going to happen. A meteor is going to strike the earth and somebody's going to get an Orioles player will be underneath it. And we are going to find out that, somebody else is going to go out with an injury.
Yeah. The idea of everyone being available and no one being traded feels so far-fetched.
And nobody being hurt again.
Yeah, definitely not going to be that case. Yeah. But I think that I don't know that, like, as you're listing these people off, like Trevor Rogers is in the Orioles rotation until further notice. Dean Kramer is never going to not be in the Orioles rotation. It's going to be like
John and I will be in walkers doing this show, and Dean Kramer will be going out there on the mound for the Orioles.
Yeah, and we'll in the moment and every once in a while we'll be, calling each other, who's been good lately? Dean Kramer. And then he'll immediately go out and do like 5.
His April was rough.
5 and it'll be like 5 and 5, like he did on Saturday. I was like, that was the most predictable thing ever. Yeah. We did made sure we did a whole. You showed the message. Paul was like, we're talking about this rotation. I was like, let's talk about Dean too. And then smash cut to Dean Kramer giving him 5 runs and pitching into the 5th. And like
your man bun brother.
Hey, like I said though, it's not 5 runs in 2 innings.
Yeah,
he always gives up his 5 like in 5.
Sure,
and that's fine. I think they won. They did win.
Yeah.
So.
Sure.
And they weren't all in 1 inning this time.
That's also
that's spread it out a little bit.
That's also very unlike him. But
yeah,
it's going to be really fascinating, and I think that's part of the reason why I also don't know that. There are obvious. We have seen Charlie Morton like pitch in relief because he had to, but there's not really, other than Tyler Wells, out of this whole group, there's not super obvious like just stick him in the bullpen, like it'll be fine. Like Chase McDermott's not really in this conversation, but he feels like a guy that you would do that with because that's might be where this is trending anyways. But like Brandon Young's not, he's like a full arsenal type guy. He's not going to go and blow you away. Cade Povich, I don't know that you would put in the bullpen. So go on down the line, you either have guys who are pitching for contracts next year, pending free agents, or you have guys that you want to be starting and like be in this, building up for next year. And it would be truly funny. And I'm only having this idea now as I'm saying it, if like over a decade after the Astros like caught all kinds of crap for going with their like tandem starters and doing that in the minors, if the Orioles had like 9 starting pitchers and like, well, we're not in the race, like Kyle Bradish, you are going to throw the first 5 innings of this game, whether they go well or not. And then Dean, you're going to come in for the last 4. And that's how we're going to do this. And like, we will pay you arbitration wise, like you pitched a few more innings and we're just doing this because our season's over and it doesn't matter. And we need you guys all to get innings. And like, and then we'll have a bullpen day and everyone can pitch on day 3 of the series. And it'll be absolutely ridiculous to watch, and I'm sure it's a conversation that's been had.
And don't forget about Albert Suarez.
True,
he's still on his team as well.
After making 2 appearances to start the year.
Yeah, I think he could be a reliever. I think that's one of the guys who could end up in the bullpen.
Absolutely,
if we see him at all this year.
He was so crucial and so clutch for the Orioles last year when they called upon him. Had a 3.6 ERA, bounced back and forth between the rotation of the bullpen. And it was one of those guys, the Orioles sometimes handle their pitching prospects, especially with kid gloves. They're very careful. If they think he's a starter, they're going to keep him a starter until then. And then they're going to slowly move him to the bullpen, or vice versa. With Tyler Wells, it was always, he is going to be a reliever. He's going to be a starter. With Albert Suarez, they were like, all right, the guy's 34 years old. He can start tomorrow and then be in the bullpen 2 days later. And they've done that with some of their veterans that they don't have too much invested in the long-term status of. Albert Suarez, no matter where they threw him, he was nails for them last year. So maybe he'll come back and help them this year.
What do you think he gets tendered a contract? He's going to be like first year eligible. It'll be like a couple $1 million. I don't think that would be a reason not to, but I think that like the amount of pitchers might be a reason.
Yeah.
I think if he's healthy, he'll get league minimum.
Yeah. Yeah.
which I think he would take.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to I'm sure he's also not going to take them to arbitration and go to a hearing. You don't have to worry about that. But there's just a lot of pitchers on that. You're going to be going into camp next year with like a million pitchers.
How many times have we said that?
Yeah.
And
this
then
year
they
we said
end
that
up
for
with
sure.
none.
And we said they weren't going to need all of the pitchers they
Yeah.
had. And they'd be in a great spot if any of the pitchers they had got hurt. And then all of them did. That's on this podcast.
If
we
we're-
said that, Paul. It was really good.
If we're sitting here in February and saying, where are the Orioles going to put all these guys? John, I want you to reach across the table and slap me.
They're going to put him on the injured list eventually.
Yeah.
It'll be unfortunate when it happens.
All right. Well, we are going to talk about another arm who maybe could be in that spring training competition in that conversation in a few months. That's Cameron Weston. We're going to do our minor league check-in on the other side.
For the 5th year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, it's time for our minor league check-in. And John, this is a guy that you have covered since he was an 8th rounder in 2022 out of the University of Michigan. Right-handed pitcher Cameron Weston, 24 years old, 6'2", 215 pounds. You have him ranked as number 16 in the Orioles top 30, according to Baseball America. What do you like about this right-hander?
Well, it was pretty interesting. You know, I spent a lot of time saying, because it was true that the Orioles liked one specific kind of pitcher. You needed like a hoppy four-seamer and you needed to throw a bunch of breaking balls. And then Cam Weston kind of came out of nowhere as a low slot sinker guy, you know, not necessarily a starter profile. Usually those guys end up being like 10 years older than Cam Weston and in the bullpen of a team making like $2 million and being really good. But Cam Weston is a starter right now. So a little bit of a different profile, and the Orioles will tell you that, you know, they don't like aren't married to certain pitch types. They just like unique and like interesting weapons. And he certainly has those. He's somebody who Cam Weston started his minor league career a little late. He dealt with an injury, I think, at the beginning of 2023, zoomed through the minors, ended up starting this year in Norfolk, which I think was a little surprising, even though he spent most of last year at Double-A. And he's somebody who gets a lot of weak contact. He's somebody who gets a lot of chase with kind of a Sugano-esque pitch mix. Not to say that the velocity is where Sugano's is, but the ability to move the ball around and get guys out in different ways. He's been up and down in AAA Norfolk this year. He's kind of searching. You know, I think some guys are impacted more by going from the minor league ball to the major league ball, which they use in AAA more. I think that the robot umps they use there can be a little bit challenging for guys who kind of live around the edges. But in some of the checks that I've done this year, it seems like Cam Weston's kind of, when it's not going well for him, it's because he's searching for things within starts as opposed to sticking with, you know, he finds something that works and he wants to get back to it, but in trying to find that again, he gets away from what's been good before. So it's kind of a hit and miss type thing, but he is a unique profile, and that it's not going to be overpowering. It's not going to be a traditional, it's not like you're going to feel the way you felt watching Grayson Rodriguez pitch in the minors. Like, that guy's going to be in a rotation for a decade. Cam Weston can absolutely start games if you need to. I think that profile is typically one that you see coming out of a bullpen, and the Orioles are developing him as a starter, not necessarily with that knowledge, but you can do that. And I think it's a good floor to have. I think when, you know, scouts go in, they're like, oh yeah, that guy's going to pop around. I think he was kind of in the mix in the Eflin trade last year. And I mean, he seems like the kind of guy who's going to end up on the Rays somehow. so it didn't happen last year. And I think that it still could.
Interesting. He's got a 4.58 ERA with 9.5 strikeouts per nine in 78 2/3 innings this year. Yeah, I mean, maybe with all these guys, they come up as starters and then maybe eventually are relievers. And as we just talked about, the Orioles are going to have a lot of starting candidates next year. It doesn't mean they're going to have a lot of eligible starters once the season starts, but they will have a lot of guys in that conversation. And some of them are going to end up in the bullpen just because that's the nature of things. Only 5 spots in the rotation, 8 spots in the bullpen. Just makes sense. I think when Grayson Rodriguez comes back, we should bring back the gas cans and talk about gas him up. when he eventually comes back. That would be a nice kind of return for Grayson.
You were at that game, right?
I was at that game.
That was wild.
I then also do you remember they invite the minor league award winners to the ballpark at the end of the year, and Grayson Rodriguez came up with Kyle Stowers, who we're going to see at Camden Yards this Friday, and Adley Rutschman to Camden Yards, and I gifted Grayson a gas can, a giant red gas can, which I hope he still has. Cost me $20 at Ace Hardware. So
You shop local. That's great. I'm happy that you did that.
hopefully it went to good use.
That day was wild. That was the day.
That was very fun. That was at the real peak of Orioles insane fandom for minor leaguers.
Things were so bad that like thousands of people
Flocked to Bowie.
went to Bowie. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. Well, we got a game to cover later today. First of 2 Hawaiian shirt nights. Big day for us. Danielle, I'm not sure how the Hawaiian shirt will go with your skirt, which is already floral, but you can try it out.
Fashion. I can make it work.
It's called fashion. I mean, the button shirt, not necessarily the act of buttoning the buttons, given your shoulder, but I'm sure having like the ability to put on a shirt like that was helpful at some point in your
I
life.
can button buttons now. Took me a while.
Okay.
But I can do it now,
That is exciting.
Yeah.
Boom.
Boom. At John Meoli is his handle. At D_Allentuck is Danielle's, and I'm at Paul Mancano. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. Subscribe to the Baltimore Banner and subscribe to the Banner Baseball Show anywhere that you get your podcasts. For John Meoli and Danielle Allentuck, I'm Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.